Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again as we continue our study through the book of Judges. And in this episode, we're going to jump into probably one of my favorite stories from the Old Testament, and one of the ones that I remember hearing growing up, remember telling my kids growing up, and just one of those stories that, as we know, it's real. I know a lot of times some people like to depict some of the Old Testament accounts as just great moral stories, but a real historical event that took place. But I've always enjoyed when I was growing up, and even now hearing, where God, one, was faithful to his word, and two, just miraculously worked in a way where the world would only look and see God. God is awesome, and there's a real God. And this is one of those passages. And so we just got done talking about the idea that in the short period of time, God, there was 32,000 men. God, through two different tests, broke them down to 300 men. And then that night tells Gideon to go to battle, but he sends them into the camp to find out that even the other people have been given a vision that Gideon is coming. In this process, one of the things we mentioned in the last episode was the fact that God said go at nighttime. And we explained the fact that nighttime was not a normal time for battle due to the way that they would approach battle. Well, one of the most unique aspects of this story is the fact in a moment we're going to read a part of this story that makes the going down into battle, going at nighttime, going against all the other odds, one of the most strategic and kind of logical aspects that help these people with help the Lord as they stood and watched defeat his enemy. Please remember, it was his enemy. Yes, it was Israel's enemy, but it was God's enemy. Anybody who went up against Israel was God's enemy. And so he used this to defeat the enemy for them. And frankly, at least this first battle, Gideon and the men were just going to watch as God did what he promised he would do. So we go back to Judges chapter 7, and we're going to be looking at verse 16. It says, he divided the 300 into three companies and put trumpets into the hands of all of them and empty jars with torches inside the jars. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, and I and all who are with me, then blow the trumpets also on every side of the camp and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. Now, understand, this is the instructions they've been given to go to battle. They're going at nighttime. They're broken up into 300 camps, and what they do is Midian is down in the valley. They were sitting in the valley, which is generally where war would take place, and they're sitting down there encamped, ready to come, basically continue their oppression against Israel. And so God sends 300 men and surrounds them around the valley. You don't have to know how deep it is. It's nighttime, remember? All they can see is just what little God allows them to see. They don't have to see the depth. They don't know the details. And then in this battle, here's a jar, here's a torch, here's a horn, go. They weren't given weapons, at least that we know of at this battle. They weren't given anything specific. They weren't even given any massive strategies. Hey, watch me, do what I do, say this. This is it. This is this great, you think about it, again, Gideon's not a great military mind that we know of to this point. He hasn't been. This is his first time doing this, yet he has proven to be obedient to God to this point. He's taking 300 men and attacking the enemy. So obviously he's obedient. So in this process, let's go ahead and continue to read what happens in this scenario. In verse 19, so Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. And when they had just set the watch, they blew the trumpets and smashed the jars with that were in their hands. Then the 300 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars and held in their left hands the torches, in the right hands the trumpets to blow. And they cried out, the sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. They cried out and fled. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Shita toward Zerah, as far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all Manasseh, and they pursued after Midian. So most of us are familiar with what just happened. They get surrounded. Understand, as we say, they surround this area at a certain watch of the night, telling it's really the darkest time of the night. If you go through and study it out, the darkest time of the night, they surround and they break the lanterns. The lanterns are there to cover the torches. They didn't have flashlights. They could just kind of turn them on and off when they wanted to. So they hold up these torches. They blow the horn. Now, here is what the Midian army hears. They're at sleep, probably at the high peak of sleep. They are the most tired you could be, and all of a sudden they hear 300 horns. It must have sounded like a massive army. And then they come out and they see hundreds of torches surrounding them. Again, it's at nighttime. We don't fight at nighttime. They go out and they see all these torches, and they hear all this noise and all this screaming. And then they turn around. Now, that's what they see. And then they turn around. Remember, it's nighttime. They can't see anything. They're surrounded, completely surrounded. And then they look to the right and the left, and what do they see? They see people running like crazy. Now, here is what they're doing. You can only assume what your other senses will give you. You really can't see. You can see bits and pieces, maybe some shadows, maybe a little bit of moonlight's giving all that. You don't have all the detail, but you can't really see what's going on. You can hear this chaos. So they can only make a conclusion. We are surrounded. And if we're surrounded, then there are thousands more in the camp with us. And so we're surrounded, there's loud noise, and so when someone's running at them, they just conclude, we're under attack. So they grab their sword, and frankly, for fear of their own life, they just start swinging the sword and killing whoever they can get close to. What they don't know is they're running in fear, they're running in chaos, and the entire time, Gideon's army, the Lord's army, is just watching. They're not doing anything. God is using their fatigue. God is using the nighttime. God is using the light. God is using the fact that you shouldn't be at battle at night. All these things to put these people in this fear and all this noise. They're just fighting whatever's coming their way. And they are completely oblivious to the fact that they are killing themselves. The army of Midian is killing itself. And you know what Gideon's army had to do? They had to stand and watch. Yeah, they had to be there by faith. They had to be willing to not go home in fear. They had to be standing, go to the brook in a certain way to prove they were ready for battle. They had to go through all these little things that God said, I'm going to use these 300. Then they had to follow Gideon, who was not a military mind that they knew of, right, at that point. They had to follow him into the most ignorant and obscene, crazy type of strategies that you could use. Let's just stand here and hold a torch in one hand and a horn in the other and make noise, and we'll see what happens. We don't even have a weapon. And yet they stood in obedience. They had such trust in God and the leader that God had put there that they were willing just to step out. Okay, this is what we can do. And they stood out and they literally stood and watched the army, just the chaos, as the army demolished itself. Now, a lot of people think the story ended there. And a lot of times, like in elementary and children's church and things like that, we do to an extent have the story end there. But I want to read one more section and then we'll finish it up because it actually continues on further in the battle. Verse 24 says, Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and capture the waters against them, as far as Bethbara and also Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters as far as Bethbara and also Jordan. And they captured the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. Then they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. So what happens is he called out the messengers and says, block off the entrances. Don't let them leave. And when they get there, defeat them. The leaders had left and other people had left, and these people came down. And we're going to find as we'll continue in this, that this is just the beginning. The battle does continue where they actually go into war. They call down more people. They actually go into war. And you see that this first battle, hey, God's done this for us. Now we're going to go finish this. And so there was one answer, but then there was a few more battles after that. We'll talk about that at a later point. This story, as we look at, one of our favorite stories, one of the things we remember, we're reminded of the goodness of God, the faithfulness of God, the power of God. We're also reminded of God's blessing on the obedient and the faithful. And like we said last time, the book of Hebrews says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. That's what Scripture tells us. The whole chapter of Hebrews 11 talks about people who are not perfect, but yet stepped out in faith. And in doing that, God blessed them immensely. And that's really what God desires to do. So my challenge to you is wherever God puts in front of you, whatever He's guiding you to do, if it is what God is guiding you to do, it's not your desire, but it's His direction, trust God and wait and see what God can do on the other end. It's God who does the work, not us. And we're grateful for that. I greatly appreciate the privilege you give to me to be part of your day. Stick with us as we're going to work a little bit more in the next couple episodes into more of the story of Gideon and more of these battles and see more of what God does and how God accomplishes. And even later on, how sometimes our own pride can get in the way of even what God is doing. Again, we appreciate the wonderful privilege to be part of your day. Hope you join us again next time.